I want to talk to you today a little bit about what a summary is and how to go about writing one of an essay like the one that we just read last week called What Happiness Is. So the basic rule of a summary is that it's a reduction. And a reduction is when you reduce something down to its most important parts. If you were a cook and you were reducing something, it means that you would boil away the water in it so that what's left is like the most intense version of whatever it is that you're reducing. If you're summarizing, you're doing the same thing. You're taking away anything that's extra or unnecessary and just focusing on the key points that the author makes. There are a couple of tactics that you can use to make summary a lot easier. One of them is to remember what we've been talking about when we write essays, which is that most essays are going to have a thesis, which is the argument that the author is trying to make, and most essays will be using topic sentences at the beginning of all the body paragraphs. So in general, the main idea of each body paragraph will be the first sentence of the paragraph itself. Also, you can generally find the thesis statement at the end of the introduction paragraph. Now, in real life, when people write, they mostly follow these rules, but sometimes they don't. And that is their right as an author who has been published. So a few tricks for that. Sometimes an author will take more than one paragraph to get to the thesis statement. Sometimes the thesis statement will be in a separate paragraph all by itself. And this is a way that an author can set aside what he or she feels is the most important point so that you as a reader see and identify that this is the key point. When it comes to topic sentences, well, they mostly appear at the beginning of the body paragraphs. And remember that a body paragraph is any paragraph that comes between the introduction paragraph, which is always the first one, and the conclusion paragraph, which is always the last one. So all of the middle paragraphs are body paragraphs. But anyway, the topic sentence generally comes at the beginning of the body paragraph, but every now and then an author will put it at the end of a body paragraph. And often that's a time when the author feels like he or she needs to build up to what it is that he or she wants to say, as opposed to starting by announcing what the paragraph will do. So you've probably already noticed that I have colored in by highlighting a whole lot of this essay. And while generally when you're annotating, you don't want to highlight every single thing in the essay because then you're just coloring, I think that when you're writing a summary paragraph, it can actually be a very useful tactic. And that's because you can use color coding to distinguish between the key points, which I've highlighted in this turquoise color, and the supporting information, which I'm highlighting in the yellow color. In other words, the turquoise is where I think the author is stating most directly what he, in this case, because it's Eduardo Porter, what he thinks is the key point of each paragraph. And I've highlighted in yellow the places where he's explaining or illustrating what he means. So, as I'm sure you remember from reading this essay, he begins by stating that happiness is a slippery concept, which means you can't really grab onto it, a bundle of meanings with no precise or stable, which means not changing, definition. If I look at the rest of the sentences, he's giving me quotations from Gandhi, Lincoln, Snoopy, to illustrate the idea that if you ask different people or animals, you're going to get different definitions of what happiness means. And all of those quotes illustrate the idea that it's hard to say exactly what happiness is. So you're going to see that I did a second step. And if you've been coming to our class, our online classes, you've been working on this with me. So a lot of what I took is actually from the work that we did together as a group. So I took this sentence, the key point, and I translated it into my own words. When I translate things into my own words, I do not want to make them more complicated. I want to make them easier to understand. So I want to use clear and direct language. In this case, what I wrote was, happiness has no exact meaning or definition. Everyone has a different definition and reason for their happiness. So I've started the process of taking what the author said and putting it into my own words. I'm going to do this a couple of more times so that you can see this process. Here's an example in this second paragraph of the author making his thesis statement a separate paragraph from what I think of as the introduction. In other words, if this essay were following the directions that I give you as a writing teacher, it would look like this. It would open with, in this case, a hook that is a bold statement maybe, and then it leads up to the main idea, which is that most psychologists and economists, so these are two schools of academic research who study happiness, agree that what they prefer to call subjective well-being, which is just another term for happiness, comprises, which means is made up of, three parts: satisfaction, positive feelings, and the absence of negative feelings. And you can see that in between, I've highlighted part of what Porter added, because these are actually explanations of the three components that make up happiness. So here again, I've taken what he said and I've started to put it into my own words. People who study happiness break it down into three parts. And I'm noticing here, this is analysis, which are feeling happy about how their lives are going. That's my paraphrase of satisfaction. Having joyful feelings, and not feeling bad feelings. So again, I'm taking the main idea, and in this case, the thesis statement, which this author decided to set apart from the rest of the intro paragraph, and I've put it into my own words. Here I've done this a third time, and I'm going to start moving a little bit faster, okay? You've already read this. Here are the main ideas, these two sentences, and then here are examples which talk about research that shows that in countries, you can look at things like hypertension or how quickly people recover from colds or their suicide rates to measure in an indirect way their happiness. Because the happier people are, the better they are at bouncing back from unpleasant situations. So I translated this into happiness is a real thing that can be measured by looking at how good people's lives are. Here's the next paragraph. Again, the first sentence is the topic sentence. This conceptual mélange, and a mélange is a mixture, and a conceptual has to do with how we think about what things mean in our minds. So in this case, the examples are that if you took a happiness survey and then ask yourself what you meant by the questions in the survey, you'd actually start getting more and more confused instead of more and more clear. And that's again because even by looking at these measurements, it is very hard to measure happiness. So again, I'm going to highlight, go into review, add a comment, and say, nonetheless, which is another word for still, or I could say, yet, happiness remains a difficult thing to measure, or I might say assess or figure out if I wanted to use more clear and direct language. Now, I want to show you an example of a paragraph where the author does not begin with the topic sentence, but actually leads up to it. So he begins by talking about this interesting experiment, two experiments actually, where something as small as finding a dime or eating a chocolate bar will make people say that their lives are generally better and happier than if they don't find a dime or get a chocolate bar, which seems very weird because those are really small things. So why would they change the way that you think about your overall happiness in life? So here's an example where the author opens with some examples and explanations and then leads to the topic sentence. One might expect that our satisfaction with the entire span of our existence would be a fairly stable quantity. And that means it wouldn't change over time. So if I asked you on one day or on a different day, you would generally say the same answer. That means impervious, which means it can't be affected by the day-to-day joys and frustrations. In other words, finding a dime or eating a chocolate bar would not affect it. So this is the assumption, but the author uses yet to indicate that's actually not true. People often give a substantially or very different answer to the same question about their lifetime happiness if asked again 1 month later. In other words, if you ask people at different times, how happy they are, they will give very different answers, right? So again, I'm taking what the author's saying and I'm putting it in my own words. You will then continue to do this throughout the rest of the essay. So in this case, I'm pointing out that the topic sentence, the main idea, does come at the end of this paragraph, but I'm going to let you do that yourself. And I would encourage you to use this highlighting main points and supporting evidence in these remaining 3 paragraphs in order to write your summary. The next part of writing summary is just to take each of these main ideas and to start turning them into a summary paragraph. So I'm going to cut and paste, ignore how tiny those are, we'll fix them in a minute. I'm going to cut and paste each of my translations of the main ideas down here, separating them with periods. Whoops, well, there's no accounting for computers. Here's the next one. So let me add this here. I guess it's going to be big. Let me see where I was. I'm sorry, I'm getting okay, how good lives are. Okay, nonetheless, add this to my summary. And one more, of course, you're going to do the rest of them on your own, but you can actually just use these sentences if you would like to copy them from the video into your summary. So let me make this all the same size font so that you can read it. And here is the beginning of my summary. Now, you cannot begin your summary with the first topic sentence, however. You need to begin with a sentence that identifies the title and the author and the most basic main idea of the essay. There's a formula, and if you'd like to just copy this down, you can use this in your summary. In what happiness is, I think that should be a capital S. And notice that I'm putting the title in quotes. You put the title of a short article or anything that's shorter in quotations, and you put the title of anything that's long, like a book, in italics. Now you give the author's full name. Eduardo Porter argues that, and then in the rest of this space, you are going to put the most basic main idea of the entire essay. My advice is that you will not know what this is until you've worked through the entire essay. So I usually just leave this blank and remind myself that this is the most basic main idea or thesis of the entire essay. So you can fill that in. Now I'm going to look at my sentences. And what I'm going to do is start cleaning them up, or definition for what they're can divide it into. I take out this comment about analysis. And I'm going to choose one of these words. You see I'm just cleaning it up. I think I'm going to stick with figure out. And now I have the beginning of a complete summary paragraph. So my suggestion to you is that you freeze the video here and go ahead and copy what we have so far. I will give you credit for it. And then you're going to have to do the last couple of paragraphs on your own and make sure that you complete this portion of the essay. Finally, of course, remember to use the tab key to indent. So I hope this video is helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know.